He denied his own child. He swore the baby wasn't his, and he believed it. Years later, he saw a little boy with his eyes in her arms, and a devastating truth came crashing down. Subscribe to our channel if you believe in second chances. Mia Brooks never expected her world to fall apart in a matter of seconds. One moment, she was standing in the soft glow of Ryan's penthouse kitchen, her heart racing as she clutched the positive pregnancy test in her hand. The next, she was being ushered into the cold, echoing office of his parents, the very people who had barely acknowledged her existence until now. The message was clear, cruel, and absolute. She was not welcome. The Hayes name, legacy, and lineage were not to be diluted by someone like her. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't come from influence, and she didn't belong in their world. First, they offered her money, a life of comfort, in exchange for disappearing. When she refused, they smiled, slowly, calculatingly, and threatened everything she cared about, including Ryan's future. Mia had no doubt they would follow through. She had seen how Ryan craved success, how he idolized his father's empire, and how he had built his life, brick by perfect brick, around a dream they had forged for him. If she stayed, if she told him the truth, he would be forced to choose between her and the only life he had ever known. She didn't believe he was cruel, but she wasn't sure he was strong enough to stand up to them. So when they asked her to lie, she agreed, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't bear to see him broken. When she met him the next day, her heart was already shattered. Ryan looked at her with the same warmth, the same ease, never suspecting that the woman he loved had been cornered. She told him she had something to say, and then, keeping her hands clasped tightly and her eyes fixed on the floor, she lied. "It's not yours," she said, her voice hollow. "It's someone else's. I'm sorry." He didn't scream. He didn't lash out. He asked no questions. He just stood there for a long moment, hurt, slowly replacing confusion. And then he left. That was the last time she ever saw him. Mia didn't cry immediately. She waited until the apartment door closed, until the silence was too loud to ignore. And then the tears came, silent, endless, and filled with guilt. She packed what little she owned and left the city in a matter of days, changing her number, closing her accounts, and trying to erase a chapter that still lived inside her with every heartbeat. She was 24. She was unemployed and pregnant. She was alone. The months that followed were brutal. She found a modest room to rent in a small town several hours away, picked up shifts at a cafe while the morning sickness passed, and attended nursing classes at night. Every dollar mattered. Every decision was about survival. When her belly grew too big to hide, she wrapped it in oversized sweaters and worked until her feet ached. There were no baby showers, no excited calls home, and no one to celebrate the first kick or ultrasound. But Mia held her head high and whispered to her unborn son every night, promising him that she would love him enough for two. And when Ethan was finally born, with his blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the man she once loved, she felt her heart fracture and heal all at once. He was perfect. He was hers. And he was also a reminder of everything she had lost. Yet Mia never regretted the choice she made. Not once. It protected him. It gave him peace. That had to be enough, even if it cost her everything. What do you think of Mia's decision to lie? Was it an act of love or a mistake? A new beginning. In the small town wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And for Mia, that stability became her salvation. After Ethan was born, the days blurred together, waking before dawn to make his bottle, feeding him in the pale morning light, rocking him through colic and fevers, and kissing his cheeks when he smiled in his sleep. She had no partner to share the weight of parenthood, and no family to lean on, and she certainly had no time for regrets. But what she lacked in help, she made up for in sheer determination. Every time she looked at Ethan's tiny fingers, or caught the way he stared at her with those vivid blue eyes, she was reminded of why she made the choices she did. He was the reason she kept going. He was the reason she smiled, even when her body begged her to lie down and stop. She worked at the local clinic part-time, while finishing the last part of her nursing certification. The clinic supervisor, a woman named Janice with a no-nonsense voice and kind eyes, had noticed the fatigue in Mia's posture from the start, but she never asked about it. She just offered her an extra break here and there. Sometimes she would slide her a hot coffee without asking. Janice wasn't exactly warm, but she saw people, and Mia never forgot it. In the evenings, after work and classes and shopping with a stroller that squeaked shamefully loud, Mia would bathe Ethan, put him in soft pajamas, and they would curl up on their second-hand, worn but clean sofa. They lived in a tiny two-bedroom apartment above a bookstore, where the radiator rattled all winter and the ceiling fan hummed when it spun too fast. But the windows were filled with the golden light of late afternoon, and the place smelled of paper and cinnamon from the bakery next door. Mia made it feel like home. There were pictures taped to the fridge, Ethan's handprints on a crookedly hung canvas on the wall, and a pile of children's books beside the bed they shared. At first, she thought motherhood would feel like an endless uphill climb, a long struggle for survival. But as Ethan grew, so did her strength. He began talking early, calling her Mommy before his first birthday, and learning his colors, pointing at cereal boxes in the grocery aisle. He loved music, always dancing to commercials and jingles on chubby legs that barely held him upright. He had Ryan's laugh, a low, sudden burst that caught her by surprise and stole her breath every time. Mia didn't talk about Ryan to anyone, not even to herself. But she kept one photo tucked away in a shoebox at the back of her closet, an old picture taken during a weekend trip to the coast when she and Ryan were blissfully unaware of the storm that was coming. He had her in a back hug, both of them smiling at the camera, sand on their jeans. She hadn't looked at the photo in years, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It was a reminder of a life that could have been, if things had been different. Sometimes, when Ethan was asleep and the world was quiet, she would lie awake and allow herself to feel the ache she had ignored for so long. She wondered if Ryan ever thought of her, if he ever regretted leaving, if he believed the lie she told him that day. She doubted it. He probably had a new life now, a perfect wife, a corner office, with no idea that he had a son who had inherited his very smile. One day, as she walked Ethan to preschool, another mother complimented her on what a well-behaved child he was. Mia smiled and thanked her, but as they walked away, the woman said something that left her cold. "He has your heart, and someone else's eyes." Mia didn't reply. She just squeezed Ethan's hand a little tighter and kept walking. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't have the luxury of thinking much about it. But for now, she had forged something stable, something secure, something completely her own. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fair, but it was hers. And though she didn't say it out loud, a part of her still harbored a silent hope that one day the truth would come to light, not in chaos or bitterness, but in a way that allowed her son to know where he came from. Not just from her, but from the man who never had the chance to love him. Until then, she would keep building the life they deserved, brick by brick, quietly and stubbornly. The reckoning, the air was cool and crisp the morning Liam Harding arrived in the small town of Fairhill. He hadn't been there in years, not since he was a teenager, visiting distant relatives for a summer retreat. Now, as a guest speaker for a regional charity initiative aimed at improving access to children's health care, he found himself walking down streets lined with quaint shops, warm brick buildings, and sleepy sidewalks. Everything about the town felt different from the sharp, crystalline skyline of New York City. Slower, softer, quieter. He hadn't expected it to feel like a relief. Liam had changed in the last 4 years. The man who once prided himself on his composure and control now found himself carrying a subtle bitterness, a weariness that followed him even into sleep. Ever since the day Maya told him the child wasn't his, something inside him had fractured. He had buried the pain quickly, as he had been taught to do, and turned it into focus, success, and expansion. He was more powerful than ever, more respected, and yet more alone. Every relationship since Maya had felt hollow. Every smile was practiced. Every kiss was empty. He never told anyone why he had stopped dating for more than a few weeks. No one had ever gotten close. The event was held at the town library, newly renovated with donations from a dozen regional sponsors, including his own company. Following the speech, a small reception was held in the adjacent park. Children ran between benches while parents gathered under white tents with coffee and pastries. Liam was standing near a table, politely answering questions from local officials when he saw something, or rather, someone, that made his entire world narrow to a point. It was a child, about 4 years old, with blonde hair, brilliant blue eyes, the kind of blue you didn't often see, the kind of blue Liam saw every day in the mirror. The boy was laughing as he ran toward the playground, his arms outspread like airplane wings, gently bumping into the legs of a woman. The woman crouched down, brushed the hair from the boy's face, and said something that made him laugh again. Liam couldn't hear it. He couldn't hear anything. Because the woman, the one who turned her face to the sun in that moment, was Maya. His heart stopped. It was her. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was a little longer, her figure a little leaner, as if life had been less forgiving than she deserved. But her presence hit him like a punch to the chest. He hadn't seen her in 4 years. He hadn't heard her voice. He hadn't allowed himself to imagine what her life was like now. And here she was. And she had a son who looked exactly like him. The pieces clicked into place in his mind suddenly, violently, and completely. The breath was knocked from his lungs. That child wasn't someone else's. He was his. He had to be. Liam excused himself from the table, barely, as he walked across the grass toward them, his feet heavy and his heart deafening. As he got closer, Maya turned, sensing someone near. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, everything that had been buried came to the surface. Surprise, panic, guilt, and something else. Pain. Maya didn't speak. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes flickered to Evan, then back to Liam. He stared at her, searching her face for some kind of explanation. But all he could utter was one trembling question. Is he mine? Her hands tightened around Evan's shoulders. The boy looked up at him with curiosity, sensing the tension, but too young to understand it. Maya swallowed hard. She didn't nod. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, frozen, and whispered, "Liam, please." He looked back at the boy, then at her. The anger that surged within him wasn't the kind that explodes. It was deeper, colder. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You told me he wasn't mine." Tears began to well in her eyes, but she held them in. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't have a choice. Your parents. I believed you, he interrupted. I believed what you said, and I walked away because I thought I had no right to stay. Maya crouched down next to Evan, whispering something in his ear. The boy nodded and returned to the playground, looking back once. Then he went on. She stood up slowly, facing Liam again, the dam behind her eyes finally giving way. They told me to disappear, that I would ruin your life. They threatened to destroy mine. I was scared, Liam. I was pregnant, alone, and they made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere near you. He didn't know what to say. The fury inside him wasn't just at her, it was at himself, at his parents, at the years that had been stolen from all three of them. How old is he? He asked in a low voice. 4, she replied. His name is Evan. Liam closed his eyes for a second. 4 years. He had missed every first. The first word, the first step, the first time Evan had fallen down and needed comforting. He had missed it all, and the child didn't even know he existed. I didn't know how to fix it, Maya said quietly. I thought I was protecting you, and then it just felt too late. It's not too late, Liam said, though his voice cracked. He's my son, and I want to know him. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, hesitantly, painfully. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door he was ready to walk through. What do you think Ryan's parents' actions will affect his journey to redemption? The path to healing. Mia had not planned on ever seeing Ryan again. Never. That part of her life had been sealed, buried under layers of exhaustion, survival, and the quiet resignation of someone who had made peace with heartache. But after the confrontation in the park, everything that had once been closed began to reopen, and it terrified her. The way Ryan had looked at Ethan was something she would never forget, as if he were seeing his entire world and losing it all at once. And now, for the first time since the day she lied to him, the truth was out. The weight of it felt unbearable. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Ethan slept beside her, a small hand curled against her shoulder. Her mind replayed every word, every expression, the way Ryan's voice had broken when he said, "I want to know him." There was no denying the sincerity on his face. He hadn't screamed or angrily accused her. He had looked broken, betrayed, and quietly desperate. It would have been easier if he had left or called her cruel. But he hadn't. He had stayed. The next morning, Mia called in sick to work and took Ethan to the lake just outside of town. She needed space to think, to breathe, to look at her son, and remind herself why she had done what she did. Ethan threw rocks into the water, laughing when they splashed, completely oblivious that his entire world had just changed. He didn't know his father had seen him. He didn't know the man who had disappeared before his birth now wanted to be a part of his life. Mia watched him, her heart aching with love and fear. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that his father had been kept away before he had a chance? That night, there was a knock at the door. She knew who it was before she looked. Ryan was in the hallway, holding a paper bag with 2 coffees and a small box of pastries. He looked tired, but not angry. She stepped aside and let him in, not trusting her voice enough to speak. Ethan was still asleep in the other room. Ryan didn't sit down right away. He paced once. Then he turned to look at her. "I need to understand," he said. "Everything. I deserve to know." So she told him. Every detail. She told him how his parents had called her after she found out she was pregnant, how they had offered her money, how they had called her unworthy, and how they had painted him as someone who would resent her for ruining his life. She told him about the threats, how they had promised to destroy her future, to block her from jobs, from stability. She told him about the fear, the isolation, the humiliation of being treated as nothing more than a mistake. Ryan sat in silence, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. She could see the storm in his eyes, a fury directed not at her, but at the people he had once trusted most. "They lied to both of us," he said in a low voice. "They stole from me, from him, from you." Mia nodded, her throat tight. "I didn't want to believe they could be that cruel, but they were. And I let them scare me. I let them decide my life." Ryan moved toward the window and stared out at the quiet street below. "I hate that I believed you, that I didn't fight harder to understand why you would say something like that." "You couldn't have known," she said. "I made it sound final. I wanted it to be clean." "It wasn't clean. It was a living hell," he replied, turning back to her. "I spent 4 years wondering what I did wrong, why you would cut me off so completely. I hated myself for trusting you, and I hated you for not trusting me." "I hated myself too," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was the kind that comes after wounds have been exposed. Raw, but healing. Ryan took a deep breath. "I want to be part of Ethan's life, not just visits. I want to know him, to love him, to raise him. Even if you never forgive me, I won't walk away again." Mia watched him carefully. "It won't be simple. He doesn't know who you are. He's never asked. He thinks daddies are something other kids have, but he was never sad about it." "I don't want this to be harder for him," Ryan said. "But I won't pretend he isn't mine. I've already lost too much time." She hesitated, her hands clasped in her lap. "If you're serious about this, you need to show him, not just tell me. You can't disappear. You can't get overwhelmed and run." "I won't," he said firmly. "I'm not the same man you left, and I'm not here to take him away from you. I'm here to earn a place in his world." Mia felt something shift inside her. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. For the first time in 4 years, she saw a version of the man she once loved standing in front of her. Not the CEO, not the heir, not the dutiful son, but the man who had laughed with her on beaches and had kissed her forehead in silence and had once asked her what she would name a son if she ever had one. She looked toward the hallway where Ethan was sleeping. "Then come back tomorrow," she said. "Come for him, and we'll see where it goes." Ryan nodded. "I will." And as he left, something in her, something that had been buried under guilt and fear, began to breathe again. A father's redemption, James Harding returned the next day right after breakfast, dressed casually in jeans and a soft navy sweater. Carrying a small bag with children's books and a toy dinosaur he had nervously picked out at the local shop. Mia opened the door slowly, unsure how Ethan would react. He didn't know who James was, but he was naturally open-hearted, endlessly curious, and often confident in a way that only small children could be. She watched from a distance as James knelt to his level, carefully introducing himself with a warm but cautious smile. "Hi," he said softly, holding out the dinosaur. "I'm Nick. I brought this guy because he heard there was a cool kid living here." Ethan looked at him with big blue eyes, almost mirroring James's, and then took the toy. He squeezed it with both hands and whispered a shy, "Thank you." Mia exhaled slowly. The tension in her shoulders eased a little. There was no instant recognition or magical connection, but there was something soft and natural in the way Ethan took to him in minutes. The two of them sat on the living room floor, thumbing through the pages of a book about animals. James listened patiently to every half-remembered fact Ethan enthusiastically recited. Over the next few weeks, James became a constant presence. He didn't just show up, he put in the effort. He learned Ethan's routines, what snacks he liked, what time he got tired, what songs he wanted to listen to at bedtime. Although Mia still put him to bed herself. They would go for walks in the park together, and James would push Ethan on the swing until the boys' laughter filled the air. They would sit on benches with dripping popsicles, and James would listen to Ethan's 4-year-old thoughts on the moon, on dogs, on how superheroes probably got tired sometimes too. At first, Mia stayed close during their time together, cautious and protective, looking for signs of inconsistency or awkwardness. But James never crossed a boundary. He didn't rush anything. He didn't ask Ethan to call him Dad, or even push for long visits alone. He simply showed up and stayed. And slowly, Mia began to let her guard down, even if she didn't say it out loud. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, she and James sat across from each other in the dim kitchen. The air was heavy with unspoken questions. She poured 2 cups of tea, and they sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. "You're really trying," she said in a low voice, finally breaking the quiet. He looked up at her, his expression serious but tired. "Because I lost 4 years. I can't fix that, but I'm not going to lose any more." Mia looked at her cup. "You know, he didn't ask for a daddy until recently. Not because he felt like he was missing something, but because other kids started talking about theirs. I wasn't sure what to say. I told him every family is different, and he seemed okay with that." James's voice was thick with emotion. "I should have been there. If only I'd fought harder to understand why you said what you said. Maybe—" She cut him off gently. "It's not all your fault. You believed what I told you. I didn't give you a reason not to. I believed it because I was afraid it was true," she admitted. "Because I didn't think I deserved that kind of happiness. I thought it made more sense that I would lose you." He looked up, surprised. "You really thought that?" He nodded slowly. "My parents raised me to think love had to be practical, clean, strategic. What we had, it scared me, because it was real." She leaned back, letting his words settle in her chest. "It was real," she said, "and it was terrifying." They both smiled faintly, the first shared moment of lightness in years, the kind that didn't erase the past, but acknowledged it. After that night, something shifted between them. Mia began inviting him to dinner. Once a week, James began reading to Ethan at bedtime. He learned how to roll the boy's favorite blanket up just right for nap time. He celebrated Ethan's small victories, like learning to tie his shoes or spell his own name without reversing the letters. Ethan, in turn, began to ask for James more. He would wait by the window. When he knew he was coming, he would run to him at the door and cuddle up next to him on the sofa during cartoons. He didn't call him Daddy yet, but Mia noticed how his eyes would light up in ways she had never seen before. He felt safe. He felt seen. He felt loved. One night, as Mia was putting Ethan to bed, he asked sleepily, "Why does Nick come over so much now?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because he cares about you very much." "Will he stay forever?" Mia's throat tightened. "Do you want him to stay?" Ethan nodded, already half asleep. "I like it when he's here. It feels warm." And in that moment, Mia felt her own heart open up a little more. Maybe the past couldn't be rewritten, but maybe the future didn't have to carry the same weight. Maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't about forgetting what happened, but about choosing what came next. Ryan knew that rebuilding a relationship with Ethan and Mia was only one part of what he had to face. The deeper war was still ahead, against the people who had manipulated and silenced her, the very people who had controlled every corner of his life since childhood. His parents had molded him, shaped him, and trained him to be the perfect heir. But now he saw with brutal clarity what their love had always been: conditional, calculating, and dangerous. He could no longer look at them the same way, and he knew that the moment he stood up for Mia and Ethan, there would be no turning back. He scheduled a meeting with them at the family estate. No assistants, no business pretexts. Just him, standing alone in the drawing room where generations of Hayes men had made decisions that built empires. His mother arrived first, elegantly composed as always, her lips a painted mask of armor. His father entered minutes later, radiating authority with every step. Ryan stood his ground, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. They offered polite greetings, clearly oblivious to what was coming. But the moment Ryan mentioned Mia's name, his father's jaw tightened. His mother looked toward the window, already retreating emotionally, as if she could pretend the conversation wasn't happening. Ryan didn't let them deflect. He told them everything. That he had found Mia again. That Ethan was his son. That he had lost 4 years of fatherhood because of their lies. His voice held firm, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. He accused them not just of manipulation, but of cruelty, of stealing his time. Love, the most important relationship in his life. His father scoffed, saying he had done what was necessary to protect their name. That Mia was a liability. That she had no status, no connections, no future worth investing in. His mother's voice followed, icy and elegant, claiming that Ryan's judgment had always been clouded by emotion, and that he would eventually thank them. But he didn't thank them. He stood taller and told them they were wrong. That Mia had more strength, integrity, and loyalty than anyone in their social circle. That Ethan was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and that the only thing he regretted was not having walked away from them sooner. His father threatened legal action. He tried to remind him of financial obligations and inheritance clauses. But Ryan cut him off coldly. He no longer cared. He was willing to give up every last penny, every share, every seat on every board, if that's what it took. His life was not for sale. His son was not a mistake, and he would not trade real love for polished appearances ever again. By the time the conversation ended, the silence between them was permanent. His parents didn't follow him. They didn't ask him to reconsider. They simply stayed there, rooted in a world he no longer belonged to. The next few days were complicated. Lawyers called. Accounts were frozen. Business partners whispered. But Ryan moved on anyway. He sold shares of the company he had helped build. He announced his departure from the board and began to plan his own firm, a small but ambitious tech startup with a mission rooted in transparency and accessibility, not elitism and control. He didn't know if it would succeed, but he knew it would be honest, and it would be his. Meanwhile, back in Fairhill, Mia watched all of this unfold with a mixture of awe and fear. She hadn't asked him to do it. She hadn't expected him to give up everything. But as he showed up for dinner again and again, exhausted but present, bruised but determined, she began to understand the depth of his choice. He wasn't just trying to play house. He was fighting for a life that no one had ever allowed him to have before. One night, after Ethan had fallen asleep on the sofa with a book propped up on his chest, Ryan sat next to Mia, rubbing his eyes to ease the fatigue. "I think I finally understand what it means to fight for something," he said. "Not for profit, not for pride, but because it's the right thing to do." Mia reached over and took his hand. It was the first time she had done so in years. "And now you have something worth fighting for." He didn't speak. He just held her hand tightly, grateful, humble, and finally, truly free. The morning sun filtered softly through the pale curtains of Mia's kitchen, casting a gentle glow over the modest space where so much of her life had unfolded. Meals, laughter, exhaustion, and silent tears. The last few months had brought changes she never could have imagined. And though she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Ethan, she felt the shift in every breath. Ryan had become part of their daily rhythm. He was no longer a surprise visitor or a tentative presence, but someone who showed up consistently, with muddy sneakers and hair tousled from chasing Ethan in the park, and with eyes that no longer had the sharp edges of a corporate executive, but the quiet warmth of a man reclaiming his soul. Mia noticed it more every day. The way Ryan anticipated what Ethan needed before he asked for it. The way he asked Mia what she needed, even when she brushed it off. The way he paid attention to the small things. How Ethan hated the crust on his toast. How Mia never drank her coffee hot. How they both lit up when they danced together in the living room with no music playing. It was in these details that she realized how deeply Ryan was rebuilding not just his life, but hers too. But even as her guard slowly began to come down, she still fought against fear. It was one thing to fall in love with Ryan Hayes once when she was younger and more naive, believing that love could protect her from the world. It was another thing to risk her heart again now that she had Ethan, now that she had so much more to lose. She didn't doubt his intentions, but her instinct to protect her son remained fierce. She needed to be sure that if she opened the door completely, it would stay open. Ryan seemed to understand this without being told. He never pressured her. Instead, he found silent ways to prove his worth. He fixed the broken kitchen drawer without being asked. He took Ethan to the doctor when he had a fever. He stayed up late helping Mia prep materials for her new job at the clinic. When Mia's car wouldn't start, he showed up before dawn with jumper cables and coffee. Not to impress her, not to earn points, but because he was there now, in all the ways that mattered. One night, after a long day of preschool and errands, they all sat on the worn living room sofa, Ethan curled up between them, a blanket tucked under his chin. He had fallen asleep halfway through a story, and Mia found herself watching Ryan as he gently brushed the hair from Ethan's forehead. There was something so unguarded in his expression, something that squeezed her chest. She hadn't planned on saying anything, but the words slipped out before she could stop them. "You're a good father." Ryan didn't look at her right away. He kept looking at Ethan sleeping, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying to be. I still feel like I've missed so much." "You can't get those years back," she said softly, "but you can have the rest." He turned to her then, and their eyes met in the dim light. "Is that something I'm allowed to hope for?" She hesitated, not from doubt, but because she knew what that moment meant. She had held her walls up for so long, convinced that to take them down would only bring pain. But the man sitting beside her was not the same man she once feared losing. He had fought for them. He had chosen them. He had changed for them. "You don't have to hope," she said. Her voice was trembling. "You're already a part of it." Ryan slowly took her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't. Their fingers intertwined with an ease as if they had never been separated. The silence between them was no longer filled with regret, but with possibility. A few days later, they took Ethan on his first real trip out of town. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet weekend near the coast, where waves lapped gently against the sand, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. Mia hadn't been back to the beach since the last time they were there together, when the world still felt full of promise, and everything went wrong. But this time was different. Ethan shrieked with delight as he chased gulls and built wobbly sandcastles, and Ryan ran beside him, laughing so openly that Mia barely recognized the man he used to be. When the sun dipped below the horizon, and they sat together wrapped in towels, Ryan wrapped his arms around both of them, and Mia leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. That night, as they tucked Ethan into bed in the small rental cottage, Ryan lingered in the doorway, watching him sleep. Mia came up from behind and whispered, "It feels complete now." And Ryan nodded, his voice husky. "Me too." Later, as they stood outside under the stars, Barefoot on the deck, Ryan turned to her, his eyes searching. "I don't need you to answer anything tonight," he said in a low voice, "but I need you to know that this isn't temporary. I want a life with you, with both of you, whatever that entails, for however long it takes." Mia looked at him, the sea breeze tangling her hair. "I don't have an answer," she said sincerely. "Not yet, but I believe you." That was enough. For now. They didn't need grand declarations or a perfect moment. They just needed each other. And for the first time in years, they both believed in something that once seemed lost forever. A future. Messy, uncertain, and beautiful. That was entirely theirs to build. The autumn arrived in Fairhill in a soft, golden whisper. The leaves burned in shades of amber and rust, and the air took on that crispness that made morning walks feel like a promise. Life for Mia, Ryan, and Ethan had settled into something almost ordinary, though it felt anything but. It was the kind of normal that Mia had only once imagined. Shared breakfasts, backpacks packed together by the door, laughter echoing from the living room, and the soft hum of music as dinner bubbled on the stove. It was the quiet rhythm of a family rediscovering itself, building a new world, one piece at a time. Ryan had moved into a small house a few blocks away from Mia's apartment. He didn't ask to move in with her right away. He understood that trust was not rebuilt with declarations, but with consistency. Still, he was there most mornings, helping Ethan find his socks, or carrying an extra thermos of coffee for Mia as she juggled emails and clinic schedules. On weekends, they would explore nearby trails, bake muffins that rarely turned out right, and play board games that ended in tickle fights and over-the-top arguments about rules Ethan made up on the fly. Ethan had grown comfortable with Ryan, so comfortable that Mia sometimes caught him slipping up and calling him Daddy without thinking. The first time it happened, Ryan froze. His eyes welled up almost instantly, but he didn't say a word. He just knelt down, hugged Ethan tightly, and whispered something that Mia couldn't hear, but felt in her bones. It wasn't forced. It wasn't rehearsed. It was love, finding its place naturally. But not everything was easy. Ryan still carried the scars of the past, days when doubts would creep in, when the business pressures of his new startup mounted, and when the reality of having chosen a completely different path weighed on his shoulders. He missed some of the power and certainty he once had, but he never said it out loud. Mia saw it in the quiet way he sometimes stared out the window, or in the deep sighs he let out late at night. She didn't try to fix it. She knew he had made his choice for the right reasons, but even the right choices could come with their own pain. They were honest with each other now, sometimes painfully so. When Mia had hard days, when the memories of being scorned and humiliated by his family resurfaced, she told him. When Ryan wrestled with the guilt of having left her alone for so long, he told her too. And together they would sit in that truth, not to relive the past, but to understand it, to ensure it would never repeat itself. One night in early November, they planned a small get-together at Ryan's house. Just a few close friends from the clinic, neighbors who had become part of their daily lives, and one or two of Ryan's old colleagues who had supported him after the split. It wasn't a formal event, just dinner and laughter, Ethan running barefoot among the adults, his cheeks flushed with excitement, and too many cookies. As Mia watched Ryan chatting with guests in the kitchen, Ethan tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy," he said, holding up a crayon drawing, "can we give this to Daddy?" The word hit her softly now. It no longer brought tension or fear. She nodded and followed Ethan as he proudly handed over the paper. A wobbly drawing of 3 stick figures standing under a bright yellow sun. Ryan took it as if it were a priceless heirloom. He knelt down, hugged Ethan tightly, and looked up at Mia. "I want to frame this," he said. Later that night, after everyone had gone, and Ethan had fallen asleep with crayon smudges still on his hands, Mia found Ryan on the back porch. He was wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, staring up at the stars, just as he used to when they were young and unsure and filled with dreams they hadn't yet learned to protect. She sat down beside him, and for a moment, they didn't speak. Then Ryan turned, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to marry you, not because it's the next step or because I think we need it to be real, but because when I look at you, when I look at Ethan, I see the only home I've ever wanted." Mia didn't answer right away. She reached out, intertwined her fingers with his, and said, "Ask me again in the morning, when the coffee's brewing and Ethan's building a fort out of our clean laundry." Ryan laughed, the sound low and full, and nodded. "Okay, but just so you know, I'll keep asking. Every day, until the answer is yes." The next morning, with sunlight flooding the kitchen floor, Ethan building a spaceship out of sofa cushions and wooden spoons, and Ryan pouring 2 cups of coffee with a sleepy smile, Mia looked at him and whispered, "Yes." There was no need for a ring just yet, no fanfare, just the soft clink of a mug against the counter, and the beginning of the rest of their lives, grounded not in fantasy or perfection, but in hard-won love, in truth, and in choosing each other every single day. The end of this story is a rare kind of full circle, one that doesn't erase the pain of the past, but transforms it into something stronger. What makes it powerful is not just that love returns, but how it returns, scarred, humbled, rebuilt with honesty and persistence. Ryan and Mia don't get a fairy tale. They earn their way back to each other, moment by moment, choosing love after betrayal, trust after silence, and hope after years of loss. The final scenes offer no perfection, and that's exactly what makes them satisfying. Life didn't turn out how either of them planned, and yet what they created afterward, a family built not on illusion, but on truth, is so much more meaningful. Their happy ending is not in grand gestures, but in quiet mornings, in unspoken forgiveness, and in the laughter of the child who brought together what was broken. For me, it's a story about redemption, but more importantly, about courage. The courage to face what hurt, to admit what was wrong, and to keep believing that love is worth it.